Okay, I think we'll get underway. I'd like to call the regular meeting of Township Council for January 16th, 2023 to order. Of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories this meeting takes place on of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, acknowledge our deep relationships with Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and the Semiahmoo First Nations. With that, I'll get a motion, please, to adopt the receipt agenda items. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Martins. Show of hands, all in favor? Anyone opposed? All, that carries unanimously. Move on to B1, regular council meeting minutes from December 12th. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Martins. Does anybody have any discussion items on the minutes? Seeing none, show of hands, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Great, carries unanimously. So move on to E1, Code of Council Code of Conduct Requirements. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Kuntz, seconded by Councillor Richter. Is there any discussion on this? I think that I was going to suggest that maybe we take some more time with this one, but not necessarily refer it back without some clear indication. Maybe a deferral to February 13th might be in order. Does anybody wish to consider that? Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on the deferral to February 13th? Seeing none, I will call the vote on E1. You need to vote, Councillor Martins. That deferral carries unanimously. Moving on to E2, January 2023 January grant submissions. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any discussion on these? Seeing none, I'll call the question on E2. Councillor Richter? Yeah, thank you. That carries unanimously. Moving on to E3, Reformed Land Acquisition and Disposal Policy. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Pratt. Is there a seconder to this? Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why this is needed.
Mr. Backen, why is it needed?
Your Worship, going by my memory, I think there was a direction to staff by resolution to come up with a new disposition policy that provided some detailed guidelines in terms of what it should look like. And the guidelines effectively were to try to encourage more transparency and visibility on a broader basis. And this represents the I guess the response to that direction by way of a policy that we're actually using right now in terms of one of our properties.
And then consolidating 3 council policy documents related to similar items down into one policy document.
Okay, and the other question that I had, I thought I read in here, 4.2 somewhere, that shouldn't council have the right to pull a property out if the price that comes in is too low? Like, don't we have a reserve bid price?
The concept is just that the reserve price would be within 10 or 15% of the appraised value, and that if it did not attain that, it would not proceed. However, that if it did meet the threshold, the floor, if you will, then it was actually for sale, and the condition was that the sale had to be unconditional with a closing of about 90 days.
I believe that would have to come back to council to be for ultimate approval. Is that correct, Mr. Bragan?
Correct, but summarily, I guess would be the right way of putting it.
It would be unusual to go through the process and not follow through with it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on E3. That carries unanimously. Moving on to E4, Agricultural Land Commission application number 100425. Before we get a motion, I was going to suggest that rather than move the thing and then do division, that we'll just move each individually. So I could get a motion, please, to move paragraph item 1. Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on the first item? Seeing none, I'll call the question on part 1. That carries unanimously. The second motion, second part, Mr. Bracken, maybe before this is moved, you could give us some context for a standing resolution versus a policy or a bylaw.
Oh, The reason for the standing resolution is that the ALC's requirement is that there be a resolution, I guess, for the duration of the term, either on a case-by-case basis or a standing resolution. Bylaw or policy, they would not meet the needs of their system. And in this case, what it's really doing is enshrining that when, subdivisions occur in the rural area where they meet certain specifications, such as a pre-existing lot to 1972, that it can be done so without having to put it back on the council agenda. It would simply be the standing resolution. So, for example, the one that's on the agenda today would simply have been forwarded to the Land Commission with the note that it has been, satisfies the use provisions of our zoning bylaw and therefore can proceed.
So the question, I think one of the concerns I had or expressed was the lifetime of a standing resolution. So if it's not documented in a bylaw or documented in a policy, could potentially exist forever without anybody being aware that it exists other than at a staff level. Is that a fair concern to have? But you did mention it may exist only for the duration of the term, or we could amend it to only exist for the duration of the term?
You could amend it for the duration of the term. The Land Commission, in any event, has indicated that they generally don't like these standing resolutions. They would much prefer to have council adjudicate on each one as a means of discouraging these applications coming forward. So as a consequence, they will require that to be renewed each term if it's to be remain as a standing resolution. But if we wish to put that own limitation on our end, we certainly could do so.
Okay, so I'll get a motion, please, for item paragraph number 2, if anyone wishes to move that. Item number 2, moved by Councillor Kuntz. Is there a seconder to that? Was that a second, Councillor Pratt? That was a second. Okay, so seconded by Councillor Pratt. So one potential amendment here, Mr. Backen, would be to amend this to live for the remainder of the council term. Does anybody wish to move that amendment? Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Kuntz. Any discussion? I'll open that up. Collect that again, Councillor Pratt. Go ahead on the amendment.
Through your worship to staff, the ALC doesn't like these applications coming forward. Is that correct?
What their concern is that by having this, things will be done on a global basis. They believe that with the new revisions to the, the regime, the regulatory regime, they look at councils as being a way of actually limiting or controlling the applications coming forward, which isn't very fair to councils in those circumstances where they have OCPs or plans that actually authorize these sorts of things because of the nature of their zoning bylaw. So we may be the anomaly in that. We've had this occur before, and in some cases they've accepted standing resolutions on esoteric topics. In other cases, they've required it on each application depending upon the weight of the application or the impact it would have on the reserve. In this case, they recognize that parcels under 2 acres are not something that is going to be something that is significant to the land reserve actually in the end of the day. So they've I guess notionally said that the standing motion is appropriate.
Thank you.
Councillor Richter on the amendment.
It's not on the amendment, it's on the main motion, sorry.
Okay, come back to you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on the amendment to E4. Item 2. Amendment carries with Councillor Richter and Councillor Pratt opposed. So back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Richter.
Yes, I had a question. How many parcels in TOL will be affected by this? And the concern that I have, there was a recent one that occurred right beside Township 7 Winery. And what happened was they've built 2 houses there on the front 1 acre piece of the property, and it's right up to the road allowance. So if we were ever going to want to widen 16th Avenue in that area, those houses would be in the way and they'd have to be removed, and that's going to be a compensation that's going to have to be made at that point in time. So I'm wondering, are there other properties like that, the under the 2 acres, that could impact road situations in the future?
Your Worship, as to the road situation, I know the property, and given the setbacks that are in place and the width of the dedication that's in place, there still likely is room for a expansion of the road, because it's not only on the south side, but also on the north side, there's actual lands. And what I'm saying is, I'm not certain that the actual road alignment right now is right in the middle of the dedication. It might be more to the south. So generally speaking, we're going to see that our dedications are wide enough, especially on those arterials. As to the lands themselves, the number of them, we did an analysis of that some time ago, but as I recall, these are limited to properties that were formed prior to 1972, and there was another further restriction. But I think it was Mr. I'm trying to think. Do you recall the number of properties that might be in this classification, Mr. Richardson?
From memory, Mr. Backen, less than 100. And also, I'd like to note that the zoning permissions already exist. So these zoning permissions for the 2 houses per property already exist. This is just a land holding or an ownership item.
But to go further, the setbacks are also already exist. So it's not just the properties that are going through this process. Any property that may be a 50-acre parcel could allow a setback that's equivalent to these properties themselves.
Correct, but by memory, these setbacks are substantial in those zones, which allow for at least expansion of at least 1 or 2 travel lanes.
Clarify that. Councilor Richter?
Yep, thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on E4, Part 2, as amended. That carries with Councilor Richter opposed. Moving on to E4, 207A and 207 Street Strata Road conversion to public road. Get a motion to receive, please. Moved by Councilor Pratt. Is there a seconder to receipt? This is just receipt. Seconded by Councilor Martins. Call the question on receipt. That carries unanimously. Is there any other discussion anyone would like to have on this item? Okay, seeing none, moving. Oh, there we are. Councilor Richter.
Yeah, I did have a question here on the cost to the township in the budget. What is the cheapest or the lowest amount that we would have to put in the budget for this?
Mr. Backen, do you have any?
Mr. Zwag, do you have any costing at this point?
Thank you. Through your worship, in the council report package, there's a number of options provided to council, with option 3 being kind of our township minimum requirement to make this a public road. Those estimated costs are about $600,000 without the benefit of a detailed design. That's the order of magnitude cost we've outlined for council.
Okay, and so this 600,000, if we move forward with this, is that in the budget already or not in the budget?
I don't believe it's in the budget yet, but this would now become part of the budget deliberations going forward. So.
And I believe, Mr. Backen, at previous council meetings, there was a possible option outlined of creating a public road to a strata standard or something to that effect. So I believe that that's something also that could be considered.
No, that's quite correct. And as well, the methodology in terms of how we acquire the property is something that has to be considered as well, because of the complications created by multiple strata, governance bodies, strata councils in the area.
Yeah, so I appreciated that it's for receipt and look forward to having this action item moved on further in the future. Anything, Councilor Richter, you good? Okay.
Thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, moving on to E6, improvements to snow and ice control policy report. Mr. Backen, on this one, I wanted to clarify that receipt is the third item. Was there more information to receive beyond the written report?
Mr. Zwag, I don't believe there was, but
I believe there was. So I'm going to suggest that something similar happen here, that we move item 3 first. This is a separate item to clarify it, to just move receipt of the information. Get a mover of the third paragraph for receipt. Moved by Councilor Martins, seconded by Councilor Van Popta. Any discussion on receipt? Call the question on receipt of E1 Part 3, E6 Part 3. That carries unanimously. And I was going to suggest that council consider each of these separately. So I could get a motion, please, for the first paragraph. Moved by Councilor Bailey. Is there a seconder to moving the first paragraph? Seconded by Councilor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on the first item? I believe Councilor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a concern over the cost. Clearly, we just spent 2 hours in budget meetings, and I think we're challenged this year on the budget front. So if we adopt this, does it follow that we must include 2.1 and 1.7 going forward? Like, how can we do one and not the other?
Yeah, Mr. Bracken, it'd be good to clarify the policy amendment to clarify some of the issues that the council raised at previous meetings, but a duty to fund the full scope of the policy, where does that sit?
So I guess the premise would be, once we create a policy, we then have to adhere to the policy unless there is some compelling reasons not to, which would ordinarily mean a revision to the policy. So there's no requirement for council to pass a certain policy, but if there is, then there has to be the understanding that it should be followed, or failing that, there may be a determination that we've acted negligently in administering the policy. In this instance, then the second part then becomes the funding, and the funding is based on best estimates in terms of what we think it would be required to meet the policy. Are there other ways of meeting the policy? Potentially. I would say that council could say that, well, we want the policy, but can we look at other cost alternatives? In which case, it would probably be prudent in that circumstance to take both parts A and B and refer them back with some direction, as opposed to having the policy be created and then not have the funding yet determined.
Okay.
So if that's the case, then what I think I'd like to do is to refer this paragraph and the second paragraph to the budget discussions before we finalize or adopt anything. And I also want to thank staff very much for the prompt responses they've been sending out on all the letters that we've gotten and items distributed of people with concerns about snow removal. I really appreciated how quickly Township responded to residents' concerns. So, Mr. Mayor, do you want me to move the
got a
referral now, or?
Got a couple of our speakers, so
Okay,
potential
thank you.
referral to the budget process, but I'll see the others have. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I echo Councillor Rector's comments in thanking staff for responding to this request and so quickly, and considering how the weather has been the last number of weeks, it's issue of some importance. I also want to start with a motion to refer this back to staff, the actual policy. I don't know if you want me to go ahead with this
Yeah,
or
so your
outline my
referral would be
concerns?
based on making some amendments to the policy itself, as opposed to referring it on to the budget process?
Yeah, and I think we need, the policy needs a bit more work before we
work.
actually adopt it.
Okay, or consider it further at a budget process. Okay, let me come back to you.
Okay.
Councillor Ferguson?
So I just wanted to double check the fact that if we don't use it from one year to the next as it's budget online, would that be put into a reserve or just taken away and put it to another department, if I may, through a chair?
It would actually fall to surplus, capital surplus or operating surplus if it wasn't utilized. So it would then be used, council could use it for other purposes then.
Is it, Mr. Bracken, is it as simplistic to say it would just end up in prior surplus in part of the budget process, or does it end up somewhere else?
So that's effectively correct, but there may be a distinction between capital and operating.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship. To staff, if I understood the report correctly, if this is not included in this year's budget cycle, then we won't see any tangible improvements winter 2023 to 24. We wouldn't see any of this actually implemented until 2024, 2025. Is that correct?
Effectively, there's some time sensitivity to get the equipment and staffing up for the next snow cycle. And of course, with the lead times due to COVID on procurement, specialized equipment could take some time. So I think it's safe to say that we should proceed with this in an orderly fashion. I don't think it needs to be done today, but with a view that we should be doing something in the next few months if we want to have an impact on the fall.
And do you think that the staff capacity is there to have a report back on potential policy changes as directed by council in time for the budget?
Because the policy is already created, the first draft of it's been created. If we have input or direction, I think it's probably fairly easy to amend.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
So I think I'm going to work on a solution here, a bit hasty potentially, on moving them separately. So I think what it might make sense to do is amend the motion to add paragraph 2 and then entertain a referral. So could I get a mover to amend it to add paragraph 2 to the motion? Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on adding paragraph 2 to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call question on that amendment. 6. That carries unanimously. So now we can entertain a referral. It would seem to make sense if there's some desire maybe to dispose of an attempt to refer it back to make some changes to the policy itself. And if that fails, then consider referring it to the budget as is. But if there's some desire maybe by council to amend the policy further, not accept it as is, might make more sense to do that rather than refer it and then be dealing with that at the budget. So Councillor Martins, I'll go to you. You had a referral back to staff?
Yeah, sorry, do you want me to start with a motion or
Yeah, I
my
think you should
comments?
start with a motion, then you can speak to the
Okay, yeah,
referral.
so I'd like to make a motion to refer back to staff to make changes to items, just to address, clean up the policy a bit, and
Mr. Bracken, do you want to suggest potentially a way to word that?
Oh, it was.
It's hard to do that, I understand, but if there's some desire to maybe consider it further and maybe make some amendments, but
Well,
how
what-
would we go about doing
I
that?
was going to ask the mover if they could clarify, though, what their intent was. I mean, but I think what I'm hearing is that to improve it from a grammatical perspective.
Yeah, so why don't we take the referral and then Councillor Martins can speak to the logic of the referral. Maybe that will inform the specifics of the referral. So speak to, do I have a seconder to a referral? Councillor Pratt, second to the referral. You want to speak to the referral then?
yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it goes a little deeper than grammatical. Just some of the things that I noticed when I reviewed the policy, and I let me lead with, again, thank you for the work that's been put into this so far. So adding section 4.1.2 into the policy is, reflecting what had been asked for in the previous council meeting about the snow removal on sidewalks that don't fall under, that fall under the township expectation. What I'm not clear on, though, is where does this responsibility fall in the prioritizing? So from section 4.1, we have 3 priorities for roads, 1, 2, and 3, but we don't have a priority placed on the snow removal from the sidewalks that the township is responsible for. And what I would suggest is it should be right up there with priority 1. Priority 1 is for keeping volume moving along the high traffic areas on streets, and I think the same would apply since we're looking at high traffic areas for pedestrians. We want to keep them moving too and safely. So that's one point. I feel like section 4.9 is still, it's a little bit misleading if we look back at the bylaw. Section 509 of the Highway and Traffic Bylaw. So it zones that are urban residential, multiple family residential, or residential mobile home park, they're responsible for the fronting sidewalk. But commercial, industrial, institutional shall remove snow and ice from fronting and abutting. So it depends on the what the property is as to what the requirement is for the occupier of that property. So I think that needs to be clarified a bit because there is some confusion. And, sorry, I made lots of notes here. I think there's also a confusion that I have heard, and I think we all have through the distribution list, requiring residents in particular to clear their snow by a certain time of the day off of their sidewalk. And then the snowplows are coming along and pushing the snow back onto their sidewalks. So I think it's a very real problem that's been addressed several times over that I think we need to maybe work out the language on that a bit. And I know it depends, again, whether it's within 24 hours or by 10 a.m. the next day. It depends on the type of property. So that, and then the other one was we had made a request for increased enforcement. And I didn't really see any reference to enforcement in the policy. So those are all the items I'm looking at. And then just a comment that's not necessarily a concern. Page 6 and 7, there was optional recommendations and alternatives in the staff report to contract sidewalk, snow and ice control out. I want to be clear, I'm not in support of that. I think we need to keep that in-house.
Yes, Mr. Bracken, so maybe to address concerns? Something along that. Councillor Pratt, are you fine with seconding that? Okay, so is that good? So move on. So on the referral, Councillor Richter?
Yeah, if we're going to refer it back to staff, could we also, when it comes back to us, get an itemization of the number of jobs and the type of jobs that are being created and the value of each of those jobs?
Mr. Packin, would that be maybe adding some additional level of detail on the 1.7 and annual operating increase that's being requested as per the current draft of the policy? Would you need do you need an amendment to the referral to show that?
No, I think we can include that under the 1.7 of the annual operating to give a bit of a breakdown on what that
Councilor Richter, is
relates
that
to.
sufficient for you? Just to have it by direction, or would you like to make an amendment to the referral?
I'm fine if they're
Okay.
going to address it. I
All right.
just want to know how many jobs are being created.
That's great. Okay, Councilor Bailey.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the comment about possibly contracting this out. You know, time after time, whenever you get roads contracted out, people only look at the costs, and of course they narrow the costs down by using cheaper labor. They very rarely do they ever look at efficiencies, and if you look at the efficiencies of road clearing that is contracted out, such as our highways, it is a constant state of concern and a constant state of always staying on top of the contractors. And I am strongly opposed to even thinking about contracting this out unless there is a detailed breakdown, not only of the cost of comparing it to contracting to municipal workers, but also the enforcement and the ability to make sure that the contractors live up to their obligations, because this has been going on ever since they contracted the highways out in the early 1980s.
Councilor Van Popta?
Yeah, regarding staffing, outside of the winter months, is there a need within works and maintenance to utilize these bodies, or are we creating positions that are seasonal and then just using them in other departments because we don't know what else to do with them?
Maybe Mr. Bagan, it might be helpful to outline that maybe these are additional hours for existing employees. Would that be fair, or temporary full-time or full-time workers?
No, that's quite correct. We start by trying to utilize the existing resources we have, so that could mean additional hours for existing employees. Quite often, though, there's engagements. That may mean we have to add additional hours by way of having additional employees, whether they be temporary or auxiliary, whatever that may actually be. It depends really in terms of our labor complement at that point, because the labor complement changes over each cycle each year as they advance to different positions in the organization.
So we're not hiring somebody full-time for a year when we only utilize them for 3 months for snow removal.
That part's correct. We wouldn't simply say them for a full year and have them waiting around. We'd have them doing landscaping or something.
But are
something
those
appropriate for the
positions
summer.
needed elsewhere is my question.
And that's where we have to evaluate what the demands are. So, for example, in the budget, we looked at landscaping as being perhaps something we were going to reduce. Well, if we're going to add on this end, then we may have to find out that there's another thing that can be done that we haven't thought of yet.
Okay.
Councilor Richter.
Yeah, well, that raises the whole question under the collective agreement. Can we do that? Can we hire somebody to do snow removal and then stick them in landscaping over the summer?
Yeah, the job descriptions are fairly broad in terms of the laborer's requirements or laborer's responsibilities. And of course, there's provisions for overtime and provisions for, differential responsibilities, such as being supervisory or or being off hours and whatnot. But generally, we have classifications that would incorporate that. It's going to be more the question of, given the overall budget, how does that all begin to fit in, and where do we use them in the other hours? If we're going to need 100 people in the winter and we only need 50 in the summer, how do we balance those? And that's something that we'd have to examine in the context of the policy.
Okay, and the other question that I had, Mr. Backen, do we contract out snow removal now, and have we ever had any problems with outsourcing? Or the people we outsource?
We do, so our primary uses are crews for some of the parking lots and whatnot. It depends upon the type of year. We have utilized contractors in the past, and I can't say we don't use them at the present time, but none come to mind. In the past, where we're trying to do road clearing, which is our primary concern, particularly for the arterials and collectors, the use of contracted out has been challenging because of the lack of expertise and sometimes the damage they do to the roads. So for the I guess the heavy loads, if you will, we've had to be very careful to make sure that we have people that are properly trained, and that's primarily going to be township staff.
Okay, and I recall a situation back a few years where there were some issues, and I'm wondering if perhaps the new people on council could get briefed on those issues.
I think that might have been one of the issues where we were trying to use contractors and their equipment wasn't up to standard, so that meant that when we needed them, they weren't available. Is that area?
It was something to do with trackers on trucks, as I recall.
Okay.
Great. Seeing no further discussion, I'll move, call the question on the referral of parts 1 and 2, B6. That carries unanimously. Moving on to G1, bylaws for first, second, and third reading. G1, election and political signs bylaw number 5834. Can get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just reading through the bylaw as it's written, or the proposed bylaw as it's written, just a couple of kind of issues that came to my mind. And speaking as, I think, one of the only renters on council, and a renter who lives in an apartment building, voting for this bylaw as it's currently written would basically effectively mean I couldn't put my own sign on my own balcony, because there is a provision that it excludes it from balconies, period, whether it's apartment, single family, whatever. And I know stratas often try and outlaw that, but according to federal law, they can't. So municipally, I don't know why we would try and regulate that, since the federal government says that we can't. So I would move to strike that provision. I think it's in section, Ms. Bauer, you might have to help me out with
If
that.
you could give me a section number, that'd be.
And then, yeah, so the other thing is just, I'll be very curious to see what kind of feedback we get from this. And I think there's certain things that I could nitpick, but I don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good in this case. So I support the concept and the idea of trying to reduce the waste that comes with these signs. So I appreciate Councillor Bailey bringing this forward at the meeting.
So I'll come back to have a note here of an amendment, potential amendment. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, in principle, I support changing our sign bylaw. I was thinking we should do something like Langley City used to do, where we have an area of the township where signs could be posted. But I think we had that discussion back prior to this past election. What I'm really concerned about is the comment has been made, and I think it's a valid one, that signs are needed by new people running for political office in order to get name recognition out there. So I'm concerned about us giving this first, second, and third reading without having a public input opportunity. So how could we change it to provide for a public input opportunity on this?
Mr. Bagan, do you want to address potential process for that?
Certainly, Your Worship, it is a bit at the will of council. In such situations, what we ordinarily would do was come up with what we'll call the final draft, I suppose, and then we would actually use some sort of public input session as directed by council. That public input session could range from a public meeting to a public hearing to a public meeting to utilization of computer technology for those comments, written comments, anything that the council feels is appropriate for the circumstance. Given the nature of it, I would suggest probably something in the nature of communication such as written form or utilization of a website where they could actually log their comments would probably be the most appropriate because it'd have the broader appeal, but that's up to the will of council. Yeah.
Okay, well, Mr. Mayor, after we've dealt with Mr. Pratt, or Councillor Pratt's amendment, I'd like to make an amendment that we allow for public input opportunity on this bylaw.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Great. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, as the mover of this originally, I want to refer this back to council, and some of the reasons are
Staff, you're referring?
to staff is because the intent has been completely, I gotta watch how I word this, changed. When you look at 3.1 and 4.2. And 3.1 sits there and talks about not just on private property, but on the boulevard in front of the private property. Well, how are you going to enforce that? That would be a nightmare for the bylaws enforcements, and that's not the intent. That is still public property on the boulevard in front of private property. The intent of this motion was to put it on, if you want to support a candidate, you put it on your property and say, I support this candidate. Same with 4.2. 4.2 would really complicate the existing situation right now, where if you look at contract with Langley, if someone put my sign up there, then they would not be able to put any of the other contractors, Langley's people up there. I agree with the idea of one per candidate, but this one per political organization. I'm pretty sure this comes through because this situation hasn't existed before. Okay, it's always been independence and that. So I would move to refer this back. I like the idea of getting some public input back, and because I know that incumbents always in every election, every level of government, have the advantage, and I don't want to disadvantage new people coming in any way, shape, or form. So I'd like to hear people who have that kind of opinion versus what I meant with this. So I'm moving to refer this back
Okay,
to staff.
so I
please.
might have some suggestions, Councillor Bailey, but I've noted down some of your concerns, and I'll try to process these desired amendments and referrals here in a moment. Just going to go through first-time speakers. Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, just seeing that this is probably going to get referred, just to add some, just a couple things that I just noted. Item 2.3, I noticed that there's no duration of 4 days post. If we can add that.
Clarify what you mean. What do you mean by 4 days post?
Well, all the signage is you have until 4 days after general voting.
So
But for-
you might potentially want to amend that.
Yeah, it's just missing that verbiage on that one particular for municipal.
Oh, okay.
So
I
we can
think
just
that I think that clause is specific to municipal, is it not, or is it not?
No, because 2.4 refers to federal and provincial. Sorry. 2.1 speaks to federal. 2.2 speaks to provincial. 2.3 talks about municipal, but it doesn't stipulate that you have until 4 days after general voting to remove your signs. And then one other item, 5.4. If we can add a provision to not allow reflective stickers on any election signs, it's a distraction. We have other items like illumination and rotating and flashing, but reflective stickers can also be classified in that, please. We used to have one a long time ago, I think, a provision for that.
Okay, come back to you. Councillor Martins?
Thank you. Yeah, in the spirit of the previous speakers, adding to some items to just clean up if this is being referred back. It's minor, but it wasn't for me. Moving definitions to the beginning of the bylaw rather than having them at the end would be great. Just because as I'm reading the term highway comes up a couple times, I think to a layperson, highway means the Trans-Canada or Fraser Highway, when in fact it's a far broader definition. And also section 6.4, defacing, damaging, or pulling down election or political signs is a criminal offense under the Criminal Code of Canada. Yes, it is. There was a particular incident in our last election in Brookswood with multiple witnesses seeing an individual destroying and taking down a lot of signs, and was called into the police. I'm not clear if charges were contemplated or pursued by the RCMP, but my only request is I think it would be helpful to add to our bylaw what the relevant offenses are under the Criminal Code of Canada, and perhaps the potential consequences of those actions. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Baggett, I got one more first-time speaker. Councillor Ferguson?
Just a clarification, we're looking at a referral back with some changes, if
I'm
I
going
may,
to try
right now.
to process that into one easy process here, Councillor Ferguson.
Okay, and so I did want to make a comment. I'm not sure if it's the right time, but I'll make it anyway. It's that, these election signs, either federally, provincially, municipally, or otherwise, are always a challenge, always have been a challenge over the years. And, I don't know if there's a consequence for people doing minor damage, picking one up. And some people actually, citizens feel that if a public land in front of theirs is not really public land, it's their own property because they cut the lawn. So, it's a challenge, and you're going to, one side is going to say, well, it's they want to see the democratic process proceed, and the other side, well, it's sign pollution, it's troublesome, it could be safety hazards and everything else. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I know many municipalities have made steps regarding this. I think this is another step we've moved forward. I think we tried last term to do it, and we weren't as successful. And I don't know about how many signs were out this particular election. It seemed like a lot, but it's a step in the right direction. But I think it's important that we do get feedback from the public. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to try to maybe address this, Mr. That's quite the list of each person with each member of council, some members of council with different items. We could do something similar to what we just did with the snow removal policy, refer back to improve based on concerns expressed by council. Would that be fair? And then come back with another draft, and maybe we'd get closer to achieving a readable bylaw with some minor amendments. So I'm going to make that referral. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there anybody discussion on the referral? Would like to press to speak again? Councillor Pratt, sorry, on the referral?
Yeah, just on that referral then, when the new draft comes back, are we going to make another referral then for public engagement at that point or at this point? What would
That's what I would suggest.
Okay.
The council could consider at that time when we have a bylaw that council is willing to.
Okay, so it wouldn't
proceed
come
with.
back for first, second, and third. It would
It
come
would
back.
come back for first, second, and third, and we could entertain a referral at that time for
Okay,
public input.
understood. Thank you.
Councillor Richter?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is possible or not, so I'd like to address it to Mr. Backen in his role as a legal expert. I have been informed that in other municipalities that only permit signs on private property, that the right to put signs on those properties are paid for. So whoever is willing to pay the most will get a sign on a private property on a key corner, for example. Is there any way we could prohibit payment for sign positioning on private property? Is that possible?
That's a very good question. If it's a simple singular sign, perhaps not. If, however, it's multiple signs, or the attempt is to have multiple signs, which the bylaw would address, that would limit it. The other component, though, is would it be possible then to limit it because it becomes a business, where we're actually saying that if you're going to actually have a sign and you're going to be compensated for it, it becomes a business and therefore need a business license, which we would not grant. I'm just blue skying this at the moment. So in short, there may be some non-traditional ways of controlling that if that's a significantly big issue. I keep in mind, though, that the prominent signs are going to be limited by the sign bylaw to certain dimensions in any event, so it's not going to be such as a neon sign that's going to be bright and large. It's going to be limited to whatever the sign bylaw ends up being at.
Yeah, it's just that if we're looking to be as open as possible for everybody, people shouldn't have to pay to put their signs up in order to get the best visibility. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Mr. Backen, is that something you can take under direction, maybe investigate that? That is something,
Well, I wonder if there's anything in Elections BC that prohibits paying for sign positioning.
I certainly, I don't think that that's council's intent, is to see the election sign direction that people are paying for those. So I don't know if you can take that under direction, Mr. Backen, maybe that can just come forward as a memo to council, what that might look like. Any other discussion on the referral, Councillor Richter?
No, thank you.
Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question on the referral, G1. This doesn't work. That carries unanimously. Moving on to G2, 2023 Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw, bylaw number 5828. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any speakers, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on G2. That carries unanimously. Moving on to bylaws for consideration at third reading. H1, rezoning application number 100674, bylaw number 5818. Get a motion, please. Moved by, I'm going to move that. Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there a seconder? Someone's got to second it. Seconded by Councillor Martins. Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to draw council's attention to the distribution list we received before the meeting. I had a phone call today from the Mr. Eshelman, whose correspondence is on the list, just expressing some concerns with the application in regard to the effect on traffic and quality of kind of work, I should say, or quality of life as a result of the higher height of this application. And so through your worship to staff, I was just wondering, I noticed in the report that the parking provision for this application is actually higher than required. Is that because the applicant was trying to address kind of some of the parking concerns in the area that I know that Mr. Eshelman and other residents and other business owners there have been discussing with you? Or
Yeah.
I guess another question to follow up that would be, was there any work done with the proponent to try and mitigate any of the parking issues in the area?
Richardson, do you have anything on that?
Thank you, Worship. In part, yes, as Councilor Pratt noted, there's 138 stalls provided with 135 required. Noting that there has been in the past some indication of street parking being utilized in the area. Staff note that this would be the 9th of 12 lots to be developed in the area. The height in the zone is 4 stories. The variance here is only for an increase to accommodate a 600 square foot amenity area in the top, so people could access the rooftop for some amenity. Staff also note with respect to the quality of life item, I think there was a proximity of buildings. The subject building is proposing a 5.8 meter setback and the adjacent building's 4.5, meaning a 10.3 meter setback or 33 feet, which is typical or more than we see in these types of situations. So that's just for context.
Thank you for that. And just as a quick follow-up then, in regard to the height, just to confirm what I heard you say, Mr. Richardson, that the additional height of the building, that extra floor, is solely an amenity space for the users of that building. It's not an extra floor for the, developer to get an extra few units to sell or to lease.
Through your worship, correct. It's 669 square feet. The zoning bylaw has a provision that excludes items like elevator shafts. In this case, there's an elevator shaft so that users of the building can enjoy the rooftop deck. And I think there's some amenity space, including like washrooms up there, just at a minimum area of 669 square feet to allow for that enjoyment of that space on the rooftop.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, I did note also that, thank you, Councillor Pratt, for bringing this to our attention. I did note that this area, amongst many areas in the Willoughby area community, it's a lot of development going on, and parking is a concern because a lot of trades are parking during the day, and it's basically, it goes away at night. So that's a challenge. I don't actually have the actual address of the person that wrote this. They don't have to include theirs. But surrounding properties of this site are designated for future higher density. Is that not true, Mr. Richardson or Mr. Backen, if I may?
Go ahead.
Through your worship, correct.
Okay. Oh, pardon me?
Through your worship, correct.
That's correct. Okay. Thank you very much. I just got some more information from Councillor Pratt as well. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on H1. You in favor, Councillor Ferguson? No, sorry about that. You're in favor? Yeah. So that carries you. Yeah, no, I'm trying to get better at that. That carries unanimously. Moving on to H2, rezoning application number 100671, bylaw number 5827. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Van Popta, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on H2? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, we've had a couple of items come into council expressing concerns about this application in terms of its impact on the environment, wildlife corridors, streams, traffic, etc. So I would like to refer this back to staff to deal with the concerns that were raised in those letters.
Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Do you wish to, I'm just going to open that up. Councillor Richter, I'll just take it now. Do you wish to speak to that?
No, I think the letters were very self-explanatory, and quite detailed about the burying of creeks that are already on the properties, potential impact on the flood plain area, and so on. So I would just like to see if there's some work that could, or some changes that could be made to mitigate any negative impacts in that regards.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, Ms. Bauer, can you clarify the referral? Because I haven't seen the submission, so it's a challenge to endorse a referral based on submissions I haven't seen. Yeah, so we could potentially defer it for one meeting, Councillor Richter, so everybody could have a chance to look at those, or we could refer back for council, for staff to review them and report back with what could be done or could not be done, rather than endorse submissions I haven't seen.
Well, it was in one was in items distributed, and the second one, I think, came in items that was on January 12th, and the second one came in items distributed today.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a challenge with our current process, our new process, where the public hearing would stop, and then we would get these items, we would have them, but here they can flow in right up to the last minute. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge to refer back endorsing them rather than maybe deferring for one meeting. Councillor Richter, would you entertain a deferral for one meeting?
If you wish to defer, you go right ahead.
So
and
I will
defer.
move deferral for one council meeting so I can get a chance to look at these, and maybe other members of council as well. So I'll move deferral one meeting, seconded by Councillor Martins. I'm just gonna call the question on that. That's on H2 deferral. That carries with Councillor Richter and Councillor Van Popta opposed. So moving on to N1, items from, I guess I'll slow this down a little bit. Mayor and council report, does any member of council have anything to report? No, I've got nothing to report. I'll probably do a report once every few months rather than every council meeting. Metro Vancouver and other regional committee representatives report. Councillor Ferguson, do you have anything? No?
The electoral area had their first meeting, and it was a very, very good meeting. And if anybody wants some information on electoral area, it is one of the largest parcels in Metro Vancouver, and it's called Electoral Area A, and includes University District, University endowment lands, and the property surrounding. It's a defined area, and it was a very interesting meeting. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, they can talk to myself, and I can provide the information. It's the only meeting so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this week I attended both the Metro Regional Parks Committee, the first meeting, and also the George Massey Crossing Task Force Committee. So I have nothing particular to report on those other than the work has gotten underway. And as Councillor Ferguson said, if you have any questions or concerns or want to have conversations about either of those topics, feel free to reach out.
Thanks. Yeah, Metro Vancouver started for me last week as well. I'll probably report again when there's substantive items, and maybe do it once every few months. There wasn't much going on in the first few meetings, at least not for me. So I'm going to move on to N1, tree protection bylaw update. And get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Van Popta, seconded by Councillor Pratt. So I did send around a draft amendment. I don't know if anybody wishes to move that, and we can discuss it and dispose of it. Moved by Councillor Van Popta. Is there seconded by Councillor Kunst? Does anybody wish to discuss the amendment? I might have Ms. Bauer read out the amendment for the record.
Sorry for the delay. I just, every vote you take shows up as an email in mine, so I just go back a little bit. So the potential amendment would be, number one, delete in the form substantially laid out in this report. Number two, append the after as soon as practically possible as follows. A, provide for exemptions within the building envelope and for requested driveway locations for building permit applications, along with adding additional tree replacement cash in lieu options for trees to be removed, if applicable. B, allowing for full exemption of the bylaw and by extension the permitting process for dead and dying trees with photographic evidence without application fees or replacement requirements. C, provide cash in lieu options to replace bonding requirements for replacement trees. D, remove the demonstration of undue hardship requirements or provide other improvements for council to consider that will definitively eliminate lengthy associated permit delays. And E, other housekeeping amendments as needed to remove unnecessary prescriptive language.
So that clarifies. Is there any discussion on the proposed amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the, oh, well, you gotta go faster than, hold on. Okay, Councilor Van Poptek, go ahead.
Just want to ask about, I don't know if this is the time at this stage or if it's in another process, but just in terms of addressing the cost of the cash in lieu prices that we charge, if that gets addressed now or if that gets addressed later.
Could you reread that section again, Ms. Bauer, on regards to?
Like
cash
I'm
in
talking
lieu?
the monetary value.
I understand.
Okay.
I just want to refresh everybody's memory. Just read that one point about tree replacement requirements in relation to building permits.
Provide for exemptions within building envelopes and for requested driveway locations for building permit applications, along with adding additional tree replacement cash in lieu options for trees to be removed if applicable.
So that the intent there is to capture that the idea that would be that if you had a tree with inside a building envelope, that staff could come back and propose some additional replacement costs for
Okay.
removing those trees, such that if they can be saved or they're right on the boundary, that potentially if the cost is driven up, maybe somebody has an incentive to try to preserve it. Or if they really, really need it to be removed for the sake of their housing construction and their property rights, that they would contribute more to the tree replacement reserve for trees to be planted elsewhere.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that.
Without being prescriptive on specific amounts, let
Oh.
staff come back with some suggestions.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe it was Councillor Kunst, forgive me if I'm wrong, that brought this up as well about concerns if folks have, and number one, we still have a strong tree protection bylaw. That goes out. This is just basically some changes in case some folks, from what I understand, have a tree blocking a driveway that should be taken out, and they have the professional staff to do it, and they just need a clarification of Township of Langley. And if there's a driveway or a homeowner, and to proceed with the process going forward under the tree protection bylaw, but also making some common sense, remedies for moving up the process of building a house or put a driveway or a fence or something like that. Is that not, if I may, through the chair, Mr. Mayor, the intent of your motion?
That's the intent. I don't know if staff wish to add anything. Nope. That's the
That was
intent.
it. That was
That's the
my
intent.
question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Martins?
Yeah, I'm just looking for some clarification here on this proposed amendment, the 2 sub A. Is that only referring to building permits, or does that also cover off just homeowners who within their building envelope have a tree that's outgrown the space, that's starting to cause issues, causing damage to their roof, et cetera? Is that also included in this?
Yeah, so the A is specific to a building permit application for
Yeah.
an expansion or addition, and the other one, the example you're talking about, is addressed in a full exemption in item B related to dead or dying, and dead or dying would, in the hazardous trees, there's already an exemption for hazardous trees.
It's not necessarily.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question, is I'm not referring to just dead or dying trees. I'm talking to one that maybe was planted by a homeowner 50 years ago and is not suitable for the space, and it's outgrown its space, and it's causing issues.
As of right now, that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Back and Mr. Richard, but that would follow the currently established process. There's no intended reform for that specific situation if the tree is healthy or not a risk to property or life. So that would require a subsequent amendment, potentially address that. Is there any other question, anything staff wish to add to that? No. Does that answer your question? At least on this specific amendment? Yeah. Councillor Van Popta?
So then do we want to add a further amendment to that, to add provisions for trees that are deemed to damage property?
Council can certainly consider that to the main motion, either amended or not amended, after this amendment is disposed.
After that amendment,
After this
okay.
amendment is disposed of. So seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on this amendment to N1. See, it doesn't work. That carries unanimously. So back to the main motion as amended. Is there any other discussion on the main motion as amended? Do you wish to, Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to.
Main motion as amended.
So yeah, I'd like to add an amendment to the motion.
You might need more specific to
Yeah.
that.
Just to add a provision for if a tree is damaging foundations or roofs.
Mr. Backen, I think we captured the intent here, by Councillor Martin's example, but how do we get down to an amendment? I think it may require maybe a further amendment at final adoption, maybe take some time and draft amendment that can be reviewed at final. Would that be appropriate
correct.
process?
That's correct. If Councillor Van Popte wanted to just provide that thought as she has, we could then probably work something around it and then see if we can meet the.
So that could be
intent.
done at final adoption if you want
Okay.
to take some time, have something more prescriptive that council can process.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Pratt?
Forgive my ignorance on this, but if a tree is growing and it's going to be damaging the foundations or the actual envelope of a house or a building, would that not be considered under the hazardous criteria of this bylaw? Because it's hazardous to personal and property, right?
Mr. Backen?
It may, you've hit the key in terms of its property. The question is, what does hazardous mean to property, such as falling on the roof, or does it mean actually undermining the foundation? There's likely arguments both ways, and that's why it might be prudent to clarify that, because I don't think that's something we've thought of.
So then, could it be an addition to the definition of hazardous within the bylaw itself? Because, for instance, right, there was a person during the campaign knocking on the door. Tree that was planted by the developer years ago is uprooting their driveway completely. It's not hazardous to a person; it's hazardous to property. Would that fit under that definition?
That could be considered. The question there you have is it's a driveway as opposed to a foundation. So is that significant enough to warrant replacement of the tree, or should the driveway be redone? I'm just using that as an example. I mean, I don't have any answer, but there's lots of questions.
I think the same thing would apply, Councillor Pratt. Maybe you've got 2 weeks, maybe come back with something more prescriptive that council can consider at final adoption.
Yep.
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, you've got to be really careful with this one, because I'll give you an example. If you have a willow tree can grow its roots after water, definitely, and what it'll do is go after your perimeter drains. So while you can't see that and it's not as obvious a hazard, it can totally destroy septic systems, cause flooding and all that kind of stuff. So I think this has to be really carefully looked at and discuss about different ways that a tree can become hazardous, such as excessive needle drop into eaves and all that kind of stuff. So this is a very tricky one to deal with.
Councillor Pratt?
Just out of curiosity, based on the conversation we've had, and just speaking with Councillor Van Popte, if the idea would be to come up with a new definition of hazardous, instead of waiting to the next meeting to come forward with something, could we not issue a notice of motion at the end of this meeting in other business to have staff come up and provide recommendations for what definitions of hazardous could be for discussion at the next meeting?
Your notice of motion would unfortunately be filed today, but not heard until the 30th, which would then not be considered by the 30th and resulting in amendment future on maybe in February. I think the intent here, Councillor Kuntz, even like this has been on now for a while. I think we need to make progress on some of these improvements that maybe aren't controversial. And I would be open to entertaining a subsequent amendment process to refine it further while continuing to make progress on these particular set of issues. That's also another alternative option to continue to refine the bylaw. Or it can come forward. I think, Mr. Backen, it wouldn't be onerous for staff to work with a couple members of council to help them refine some concepts for council to consider on the 30th. That would be an option as well, if that addresses that as well. Yeah. So I'm going to move on here. I'm going to call the question on N1 as amended. That carries unanimously. Moving on here to N2. Before we do this, Ms. Bauer, I'd like you to clarify some of the potential process here. We would need a new mover and seconder after reconsideration potentially succeeds, and then we would need to either replace the motion by amendment or move a new motion. Those are two options?
The way it would be done at this point is that we need a mover and seconder for reconsideration, at which point the reconsideration vote would happen. There's no discussion on reconsideration. If reconsideration is adopted, we move forward to the existing motion as it was adopted. We would have to either either approve that motion, approve it with amendments, or defeat it.
And would you need a new mover and seconder?
Yes, it is.
Because Councillor Davis,
Yeah, it goes right back
Yeah,
on the
right
table
back
as
on
it
the
never
table.
happened.
It needs
So
to
we
be
start
moved
at the
and
beginning.
seconded again.
And then at that point, I believe the mayor has provided an alternative motion, but we need to defeat the primary motion and then go to the alternative motion.
So I'm going to move reconsideration. Is there a seconder to reconsideration? Moved by Councillor Martins. I'm going to call the question on reconsideration. So that carries with Councillor Kuntz and Councillor Richter opposed. So I'm going to now ask for a mover and a seconder to the original motion. I'll move the original motion. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Is there any discussion on the original motion? Yep. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I'm very curious as to why we're reversing our stance now. The previous council had a very robust discussion around the Metro 2050. There were a number of items that were...
So, Councillor Richter, I would just say that we would be speaking at this point to the original logic of the original motion, not reversing previous direction. We're debating the content of the original motion. Maybe that would be more applicable if we get past this motion, discussing not proceeding and adopting MetroFit 2050.
No, but I'd like to know, you were one of the most vocal people saying at the time that we shouldn't be adopting 2050. Why have you changed your position?
I'm happy to answer your question if that's your question. Is that your
Yeah,
question? Why am I changing my
that's
position?
my question.
It's because I can go with other first-time speakers and then I can speak to the main motion after that. So go ahead.
Okay, well, we still have a problem with Metro 2050 from my perspective, and the big problem that we've got, well, there are things that this original motion didn't address, such as the need for more schools, K to 12, the need for better transportation infrastructure, and some other infrastructure. But the big thing to me was what was done in South Campbell Heights, with the decision that the Surrey Council made and got through Metro to make those lands light industrial. And that puts our Brookswood aquifer at risk because a large part of the aquifer's recharge area are on those lands. And it concerned me then, it concerns me now, particularly in an area like Langley Township where we rely heavily on blended water, that the source of the blended water that we're using, our own aquifers, can be damaged through the actions of neighboring communities. And I think that protection of groundwater and protection of recharge areas for the groundwater, including protection of tree canopy, to ensure that there is proper recharge going into the aquifers, needs to be included in Metro 2050, and it's not. And the problem with passing Metro 2050, it's being presented very much as an update to Metro 2040. But Metro 2040 has been in place for basically a decade now. Metro 2050 will be in place for a decade. How much damage can be done to our aquifers by neighboring communities over the next decade? We simply need the protections in Metro 2050 for our aquifers.
Okay. Councillor Kuntz?
Yeah, same. I mean, I remember that we had these discussions. Now we're seemingly adopting it. Would there be any interest, or would council consider possibly postponing this decision so that maybe new members of council could have another perspective? Maybe that this is a lot of information. 2050 is a huge. It'll have huge impact on the township of Langley, and I think that maybe we all need a mini course on maybe the ramifications of adopting Metro 2050 without, this has come up and we haven't really had a good discussion about it.
Councillor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through yourself to staff, on page 9 of the report where it lists the 7 issues that the township had originally with Metro, or Metro 2050, it mentions that there's 2 that were resolved and several that were not resolved. Theoretically, if we were to pass and approve Metro 2050 today, I know that a RGS amendment takes some work in terms of the approval that you need from the other members of Metro in order to make a change to the document. If we leave some of these outstanding issues, how difficult is it to go back and try and change language in the document around aquifers, after the fact? If that question makes sense.
I think I'd phrase it this way. The Metro 20, 50, 30, 40, 20 concepts are not particularly flexible. They tend to have a high threshold that have to be met by the Metro board. They have been designed that way intentionally so there would be some certainty in terms of the region's growth. So I think the concept here is a balanced one where there's some recognition of, I think, the history, but also some recognition of the, I guess, special needs that remain outstanding, and that may come up in further discussion. So the 2 things, then, I guess, it's not very flexible, and as well, I don't know if there's a very broad approach taken to it, if that has a high probability of success. In fact, it's something they've resisted so far in our discussions at the staff level.
So, for instance, because one of my biggest concerns with this, and it says it's resolved, but I don't see it as an issue that's resolved with regards to the major transportation network, not connecting it to Aldergrove, especially as we densify Aldergrove. So if it's not included in this document, does the township have any rationale for expanding transit service to Aldergrove in the next 10 years?
So the transportation network is a bit easier because that involves a third party, which is with TransLink. And our challenge going forward on those sorts of topics is Metro Vancouver, I think, has explained that the broader and the more grander the improvements or the language is, the more difficult it is for them to support it. So this was intended to be a minor update, although, again, as I caution, these are very amorphous things that begin to grow. They're looking at a much larger update as going forward. Now, a total update is something that we should embrace but be cautious of, because we are as was referenced, one of the players of many in this. So because of the link to TransLink, and that I think it's going to be more something that's demand driven as opposed to prescriptive by the Metro plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to this motion. Councillor Ferguson, I'm going to just go first and then I'll come back to you. You got to be faster on the draw. So the process here is that I'm going to support is voting against the original motion from the previous council to then replace it with the motion provided within the agenda, which adopts Retro 2050 subject to, but within quotations, because we cannot adopt it subject to anything, but with an understanding with Metro Vancouver senior management that they will pursue item 1 and item 2 for us. So that is the crux of this. The Township of Langley has 2 choices at this point, and this council has 2 choices. We can continue to object to 2050, subject to these reservations and objections, and we can go to arbitration, non-binding arbitration, mediated or overseen by the province. And we'd be the only municipality in the region doing that. City of Surrey has subsequently also dropped its objections to 2050. There was some comfort that in the previous iteration, we were not the only municipality that had concerns related to Metro 2050. We are now the only municipality. We stand alone in objecting to 2050, and I don't find that a comfortable position to be in. I would like to repair and move forward with improving our relationship with Metro Vancouver, not continuing to do the opposite. The other thing is, Councillor Richter referenced, is item F is one of the strongest items that led me to support not adopting 2050, which was related to the Williams Neighborhood Plan and the requirement for employment lands at 80th and 216th on the northwest corner, which was resulting in a 15-acre single-story strip mall with no ability to do much about that as seen within the Williams Neighborhood Plan, subject to a regional amendment to Metro 2050. So I believe that the election has resolved that to a significant degree. It is my hope and my understanding that many of us campaigned against a 15-acre strip mall next to farmland, and that would not proceed with this council. I'm moving forward to drop my objection to 2050 based on that understanding, that we can then pursue an amendment with Metro Vancouver to allow for some more flexibility at that location, with consultation and coordination with the Metro Vancouver board and staff, not through an arbitration process with the province, which will continue to deteriorate the relationship. So that is, and I'll speak to the items, items number 1 related to Salmon River and a map adjustment when we come to that motion, if we come to that motion. But that's the basis for me bringing this to council for it to consider, to move forward with 2050, together with every other municipality in the region, and repair that relationship and improve it and make progress for Langley's interests via that process, not by arbitration. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. I think you covered a number of things, the fact of Surrey moving forward, and also what I wanted to ask you about, it's been asked already, and number 1, your step is you have to go with this motion, if approved today, you have to go to the board, and then the board, they still have to decide whether they
Was the
accept.
second motion or this motion?
Well, the ongoing, the next motion, I guess.
Next motion, yeah. I'll
We're
address
covering a
that
lot
when
of
we
things
get-
at
if we get
once
there.
on purpose. And also future densities, future land uses, including agriculture, amongst other things, that will be decided accordingly based on what Metro Vancouver says. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to second speakers, but the process here is to vote down the previous motion, which did not adopt 2050, to replace it with a subsequent motion. Councillor Richter.
Okay, so if we vote this down, how does your proposed replacement motion deal with the issue of protecting our aquifers?
So the response there is, unfortunately, and relates to Campbell Heights. There's 2 sections to that which I can try to address as best I can. Maybe Mr. Richardson and Mr. Backen can weigh in. It's my understanding, was speaking with Mayor Locke, that Campbell Heights is all but a done deal. That the aquifer issues and contamination issues are not the jurisdiction of Metro Vancouver. That is Metro Vancouver's position. That will be their position with the province, and arbitration with the province, that we are asking them to do something which is not their responsibility.
So we should back away from this? Like, I don't understand. We depend on blended water. Why would we give up protecting blended water?
So I don't see it as giving up. I see it as something in relation to jurisdictional, that asking Metro Vancouver to address provincial and federal concerns would be similar to asking the province to issue passports.
No, I don't get that analogy, and I really think that it's a wrong move not to have some sort of protections put in place in 2050 for our aquifers. And so I'm supporting us continuing to move forward with the arbitration process so that we can get those protections in place.
It'd be my understanding, but of course we don't know the outcome of something we're not about to do. My understanding, they have a strong case that is not within the scope of the current process of updating Metro 2050. Mr. Richardson, maybe you could add some scope to the current scope of the update?
Thank you, Worship. I guess briefly, your synopsis with respect to the jurisdictional items, staff will concur with that. I don't know if I can add more broadly the
That
land use document.
maybe you could just confirm for council that the intended scope for switching or improving 2040 to 2050 is intended as a minor progress on the regional development land use plan, not a major update where these other items could be potentially added in the future. It's intended as a very minor update.
Correct, that was the intent, Your Worship.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Councillor Richter, do you want to add to that?
No, I don't accept it, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, and I think you're making the wrong decision here.
Yeah, I
But
totally
that's
respect.
all I can do is exercise my vote.
I appreciate and respect your desire to protect the groundwater. I share it. It is not going to come from arbitration or from Metro Vancouver.
Well, it should be.
I wish I had you might have to become premier to make that change, Councillor Richter. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. I see nothing. I'm going to call the question on this, and I do not support proceeding with arbitration with the province. Thank you. Well, I did it again. I'm going to recall the vote. Going to call the vote again. Sorry about that. I'm going to call the vote again. Okay, all right.
What are we voting?
Okay, so just, Ms. Bauer, you want to clarify, we are voting on the reconsidered motion, and I am recommending the council vote it down. That be correct?
Yes, you're voting on the motion as it was originally moved.
This motion here.
So
that was
whatever
originally-
motion is written there is what you're actually voting on.
We're voting, and I'm suggesting we vote that down. So I'm going to call the question on the reconsidered motion N2. I'll wait till everybody votes, including myself. Everybody has voted. There we are. And the motion is defeated. It's defeated. I'm opposed. I don't know what I was doing there. I'm opposed. No, I'm going to call it again. Yeah, I'm going to call it again. I'm gonna call-
Yeah, I think there's some confusion.
We're not
Councillor Bailey, what would you like to clarify?
Exactly what a yes or a no is gonna, things, because
we are-
this poor old brain's getting
Yeah.
a little confused.
So what we have done is we have reconsidered a motion from the previous council, and it is now back on the floor. It's been reconsidered, and it's been moved and seconded. We have discussed it, and you are now rendering your vote on that motion as in the agenda package. And that, voting it down would allow us to have the basis to proceed with the subsequent motion within the agenda.
So an opposed will vote it down,
And then we would move on to the suggested motion in the agenda. Okay? Does that clarify everything? Good? Okay. N2, and I am opposed. Yes, that's correct. There we go. There we go.
Sorry. Jesus.
Motion fails with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Van Popte, Councillor Pratt, and Councillor Ferguson opposed. So we're going to move on. I'm going to move the motion as suggested at the bottom of page 9 and the top of page 10. And I will read the motion. I will move that motion. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Martins. So I'm going to read this motion just to clarify here and give everyone a chance to study it a bit more. Move the motion that council advise the Metro Vancouver Regional District Board that the Township of Langley accepts MVRD Regional Growth Strategy Bylaw number 1339/2022, a bylaw to adopt Metro 2050, rescinding council's previous approval to accept, previous refusal to accept Metro 2050, subject to the following. One, that a memorandum of understanding between MVRD and the Township of Langley be developed to define rural for the Salmon River uplands noted as rural within the sewerage area and the sewerage extension area in Metro 2050, with consideration that rural be defined to allow gross densities equivalent to half-acre lots with some minimal flexibility for subdivision design as may be appropriate. And number 2, that post-adoption of Metro 2050, Metro Vancouver initiate a Type 3 amendment to correct an error on map 12 that reverses areas titled rural within sewerage area and sewerage extension area. I have moved and seconded. Carry on. Councillor Richter.
Yes, I'd like to move an amendment to this motion.
Okay,
I'd
maybe,
like to move that the latter part after Metro 2050, so the phrase with consideration that rural be defined to allow gross densities equivalent to half-acre lots with some minimal flexibility for subdivision design as may be appropriate.
Okay.
I move to delete that.
okay, I'll come back to you, Councillor Richter. I have that here. Councillor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I guess two points. The second one is similar to Councillor Richter's concern. To your point earlier, where we can't necessarily make any subjects to approval of Metro 2050, do we have any guarantees or sureties that Metro 2050 would actually go forward with these two requests of ours
Yeah, so
upon adoption? Is that something that they've written to us or
I haven't
expressed to
spoken
you?
to the motion yet, but I'll do that when there's no other first-time speakers, and I'll address that.
Okay. And then the second question would be, with consideration to those half-acre lots, would that be allowed, as soon as this is approved or as soon as the update to Metro 2050 is done and that's approved, would somebody be able to come forward in Salmon River and apply for a half-acre subdivision?
No, so I'll address that as well.
Thank you.
So seeing no other first-time speakers, I'll speak to the motion here on outline number 1, and then I'll go back for amendments. The intent here, as I understand it, and again, I'm still learning about it, the desire to see, Mr. Back maybe also potentially provide some context here, to see historical challenges and desires of the Township of Langley to see wastewater service brought into the Salmon River area. Maybe you could give some background and context on longstanding, and Mr. Richardson could add to that as well, that this is a longstanding desire to see this area, that service extended to that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship. It goes back many years, and that's primarily parts of the Salmon River, Forest Knolls and other areas, and that's simply because of the density that was in those areas and the impact it was having on the Salmon River aquifer that was in the area. There was concern that by having that aquifer, I guess, vulnerable to the septic fields and those densities would be something that would be detrimental in the long run. So as a consequence, the thought was always to include that area as a potential for, I guess, the densities that would permit the I guess, infrastructure that would prevent that, but still having to balance off against that some of the planning issues that were probably alluded to in terms of not trying to actually overly densify that area, but to protect it from what's there now.
Yeah, and so to me, it'd be great progress to see some progress made on this with Metro Vancouver, such that we could see people potentially, we could expand sewerage area into Salmon River and get people off of septic fields, off of putting that into the ground and getting that serviced properly along with other urban areas of the township. It's not trying to convert Salmon River into an urban area. Would that be something that you'd be fair assessment? Ms. Richardson, do you have anything to add to that?
Just concurring with Mr. Backen's comments as well, that would move towards some of the items in our subdivision development servicing bylaw, which is recognize some of those challenges in terms of nitrates and others, and this would work towards resolving that as well, Your Worship.
So I would address the half-acre lots and where that came from. The challenge, that came from a conversation with Metro Vancouver in regards to definition of rural and what they prefer to try to use, my understanding, try to use the wastewater service as a way to limit urban sprawl and not service rural areas with urban style development. So that leads to a conversation of what is the definition of rural, and that is currently very vague. And how do you come up with a definition of that? The half-acre lot came from, and again, maybe I think staff could provide some context, that we have some properties in these areas that have the right of land strata subdivision. So that if you have a 1-acre lot, then they subdivide using land stratification into half-acre lots separate from a municipal process. And then if we're in an effort, would like to see that, even if they have those land property rights, have them proceed with a standard style subdivision because they end up with that subdivision regardless, that they now would not necessarily be serviced by Metro Vancouver because the lot sizes would be too small. And this led to, I think, a good compromise, potentially considering a rare circumstance where half-acre lots end up existing anyways. Maybe Mr. Beck and Mr. Richardson, you can provide some context where that happens regardless.
Well, I think you're correct, Your Worship, is in those areas where there may be a 1-acre parcel that can be still stratified and with an RU designation. Those are the key areas, and as you've said, one of the big challenges we've had is defining rural. It's been notionally thought that it was something around 1 acre, but there was no hard and fast science to that, and this actually kind of enshrines that, because if it's zoned 1 acre but rural, that would permit the second residence, and that would address the issues you raised.
Yes, and so if we're also heading in a direction where maybe Mr. Richardson, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe helpful?
Just supplemental to that, and that would also provide some more, work towards a more definable mechanism to work towards resolution of those items and providing some robustness to that definition, which would be helpful in terms of its interpretation.
So I think the concern that was raised in the rounds to this is an endorsement of half-acre lots. I think that's a very reasonable concern. It is not. So I just want to clarify with staff that in order to proceed with a half-acre subdivision, that would require a rural plan amendment in many cases, would require a process with council, and that would be completely separate from a process with Metro Vancouver to have the right to provide some areas with wastewater service. Is that correct or not?
In summary, that's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that what I think is something for council to consider is moving beyond continuing back and forth with Metro Vancouver regarding delivering modern infrastructure to Salmon River, and for the Township of Langley to have that option in the future, and having that resolved with the Metro Vancouver board based on a memorandum of understanding that if the Township of Langley ever wants to pursue that could be done through an amendment process. So I believe that this has some benefit to the long term of the Township of Langley, where we end up with these half-acre lots, but in no way is it endorsing moving forward in that direction. It's just accepting the real-world reality that we face with land stratification. Item number 2 is related to a map amendment, which will be resolved. Staff at Metro Vancouver will initiate a Type 3 amendment of their own volition to correct an error that was identified by staff. So I support this. I support moving forward with these objectives. in a constructive, positive way, improving and developing the relationship with Metro Vancouver. Myself, as the chair of the Regional Planning Committee, I think we're well on our way to advancing our interests at Metro Vancouver by a different approach than maybe we've seen in the past. Councillor Kunst.
What would be, like if Metro 2050, we adopt this and they say, well, actually, no, we're not gonna, that's really nice and everything, but what mechanism do we have in place that we can actually rely on that MOU?
Yeah, so you would have to make a calculation that I've made, that they have looked me in the eye and said that they will do this. They have no obligation legally to do it.
They have no legal obligation.
No.
But so it's a handshake. It's
That's correct. Mr. Richardson, maybe you can clarify the process here. We
'cause we know
cannot,
how handshakes go.
we cannot,
Does not work out.
we cannot adopt Metro 2050 subject to conditions that we can essentially say we would ask them, subject to the following, but that's the agreement that's worked out with them. But we're adopting Metro 50 and officially requesting that they pursue these two items. Or we can proceed to arbitration with the province. Those are the two options.
But we still have no real tangible thing that says, actually, no, township, we're not gonna, like, 4 years, 5 years from now, you're maybe not the mayor anymore, and you're maybe not head of regional planning. And we have an issue in the Salmon River Upland where, this was agreed to, and it was a handshake, or it was a look in the eye, or whatever you want to call it. What is it that, makes sure that this is
Yeah,
is
I
in
would like,
place?
once this MOU is established, it would be my goal to have the Township of Langley, subject to council direction, initiate the changes based in that MOU as an amendment to Metro 2050.
Great, thank you.
And they'll either do it or they won't, or the alternative is non-binding arbitration, which will result in my opinion, largely the same outcome. Councillor Richter.
Okay, well, I want to strike the half-acre nonsense because that is something that needs to go to the public before we would even consider advancing it to Metro.
So you wish to move an
in my
amendment,
opinion.
as you outlined, to delete all the words after?
I'm going to move an amendment, yes, but I want to speak to it first. The other,
I think I would need you to move the amendment and then speak to it, Councillor Richter.
okay, then I'll move the amendment. So to put a period at the end of Metro 2050 in item 1 and delete everything after
Delete the
that.
remainder. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Pratt seconds for discussion. Go ahead,
Okay.
Councillor Richter.
We've given up on the Brookswood Aquifer protection, and now with this particular phraseology, we're putting the Hoppington Aquifer residents at risk. Because if you're bringing sewer into that area, you are taking away water to Anasis Island that is used to recharge the groundwater in the area through the septic systems. Like, this makes no sense. And I don't see how you can actually even put forward this motion because you've got a subject to in it. And we've been told, Mr. Backett, maybe you can clarify it. How can we possibly send forward a motion with a subject to in it?
And Mr. Bagg, maybe clarify that legally that it'll go this way, but we've adopted Metro of 2050.
That's correct, Your Worship. What I heard, that it was acknowledgement that the subject to was not really applicable to our permission or to our endorsement, that the 2050 was in fact endorsed outright, and that there was an understanding, if you will, the subject to, that we would address these subsequent two issues. So I think it's been discussed that the thought that there might be some legally binding understanding as to paragraphs 1 and 2, or points 1 and 2, is not there. It's simply based on their representation, effectively, that I interpret it to be, that they'd use their best efforts to advance them.
It may have been better language there to say subject to the following understanding, as opposed to subject to the following.
All right, but it still amounts to the fact Brookswood Aquifer is not protected anymore, and this motion jeopardizes Hoppington Aquifer. So I think we need to eliminate the part about half-acre lots. Because you're just doubling the density in that area.
Okay, well, I'll respond to that later. Councillor Van Popta, go ahead.
Sorry, my understanding is that we're actually protecting the aquifer by getting septic off of that area by bringing in sewer. Is that not correct?
I think, Councilor Pimento, if this were to proceed with to MOU phase and an official capacity to extend a sewerage area, that we would have the option to deliver wastewater sewer into that area.
So
Right
we're
now, we
pre-
don't even have the option. So this is creating the option for this council or future councils to have forevermore. It
Well,
is
just
not,
as a
excuse me,
point-
Councilor
point of-
Richter, I have the floor.
point of
What's the-
clarification.
No, there's no such thing as point of clarification.
Okay, point of order.
What's your point of order?
Don't we already have this agreement, or isn't Salmon River Uplands a rural area within the sewerage?
Is that a question or a point of order, Councilor Richter? You can always
Okay.
request to speak again and ask that question. I don't see that, is that a point of order? I don't think that that's a point of order. Carry on, Councilor Van Popta.
Sorry. So by potentially bringing in sewer to this area, we're actually protecting the aquifer.
That would be my position as well.
Okay.
But also potentially combined with water service, which would no longer have people drawing from the aquifer. There would be modern infrastructure would protect groundwater and assist the area,
Right.
not the opposite.
So we're actually protecting it, not damaging
That
it.
would be my position as well.
Okay. And
Councillor-
sorry,
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
and just to clarify, Metro never was protecting our aquifers. Metro, that's not the jurisdiction of
That's
Metro Vancouver.
my understanding. Mr. Richardson, maybe you can clarify that point?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct. It's a jurisdictional item. That's not under the purview of Metro Van.
Has nothing to do
And
with
sorry,
Metro
whose
Vancouver.
jurisdiction does that fall under?
Through Your Worship, the province.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I guess through yourself to staff, for my clarification, this clause helps us go to Metro to have the option to extend services, water, sewage. And if my understanding is correct, a motion we passed at the very first meeting of this council in regard to the Salmon River Uplands within the rural plan stated that there could be no subdivisions that resulted in lots smaller than the prescribed lot size until a review of that plan was completed. So by us passing that clause that Councillor Richter is trying to eliminate, does that preclude our review of the Salmon River area? Or are we still safeguarded by the fact that a review has to be done before anybody can actually subdivide to half acres?
I appreciate that distinction. I'm just going to highlight, to be more accurate, in my opinion, that the motion adopted by council was to not review the rural plan, but to not automatically approve subdivisions that comply with the zoning bylaw until council has a chance to consider a process which has not been brought back yet.
Correct.
So it may or may not.
So based on
contemplate
that
a
understanding,
rural plan
we still
that
have a
you-
security to not have subdivision applications come forward for half acre lots.
Mr. Richardson, do you want to clarify that?
Your Worship, I think there's two orders of jurisdiction trying to occur at the same time here. First is the motion with respect to Metro Vancouver and that sort of regional designation. The second one is the council motion with respect to subdivision of the Salmon River being against the public interest for the time being until the Township of Langley process has been initiated to update that. So they're pertain to the same lands, but they're separate in terms of the applicability in terms of those levels of government documents.
I just want to clarify that process to complete that motion from November may or may not involve a review of the rural plan. That is not necessarily going to happen, but it's not been ruled out.
Correct, and the current, I guess, proposition being contemplated wouldn't be inconsistent with that either.
That's correct. Yeah.
So,
That's my
so
understanding.
to clarify, there is the only mechanism that somebody could apply or get a subdivision to half acre within the Salmon River area would be through an amendment to the plan anyways. It's not going to happen by
Would be
right.
through this council, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Not through Metro Vancouver. This is having the option
Yeah.
to provide sewage service and no longer be not allowed to do that. Yeah. Then with my understanding with Metro Vancouver that the memorandum of understanding would be worked out with our staff and their staff and this council, and that would be the basis to move forward with the Metro Vancouver board with staff support at Metro Vancouver. Councillor Pratt, do you have anything else? Nope. No. Councillor Richter.
Yes, I just wanted to.
This is on the amendment, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to explain how this is not really protecting the aquifer, it's actually hurting the aquifer. Because what a septic system does is the discharge of effluent from a household is put in a tank, it's fed out of the tank into a weeper bed, where it goes from the weeper bed and percolates down through the layers of gravel and or clay or whatever happens to be around the house into the groundwater surrounding the house. The groundwater surrounding the house is what's fed into the well at the house. And so the water that's being drawn out of the well and used for washing and cooking and drinking and then gets recycled on the property itself to go back into recharging the groundwater. So if you're pulling a certain amount of water out of the property, and every time you flush your toilet, it doesn't go back into the property, it actually goes down a pipe and all the way out to Annacis Island where it's dumped into the sea, you're taking water away. You're taking recharge water away from the well. And we have a lot of people in the rural areas of Langley, particularly in Salmon River uplands, that have private wells and septic fields. And the system is self-sustaining because what goes out goes back in eventually. So that's how it works. Now, if we're going to define this as half-acre lots, then what we're doing is we're pulling that water out and it won't go back in and recharge the aquifer. And that's how the Hoppington then becomes problematic. Not that it hasn't been problematic anyway lately, because the levels in it are dropping. This is just going to force the levels in it to drop even further. So I would strongly recommend that if we stop it at Metro 2050, staff can go in and define or work out whatever kind of agreement that they have with Metro Vancouver. It doesn't have to be half-acre lots. It could be 1 acre lots. But I'm sure that they can work out between themselves what is an acceptable size. I just don't think putting half-acre lots into play right now is fair when it hasn't gone through a public process. So that's what I have to say on the matter. Thank you.
Yeah, and I totally respect that position, just disagree. I think that this MOU with Metro Vancouver is specific to them allowing an extension to the sewage service areas to be defined to allow gross densities equivalent to half-acre lots within their sewage extension area process. That is completely separate from what our community and this council and staff come together to determine is the future of Salmon River. That is not predetermining half-acre lots, and that is just simply not what's happening here. This is allowing for that flexibility based upon what I've already covered, which is the reality of land stratification.
Okay, and the other thing I want to point out is that this motion does not cover water. It's just sewer.
That's correct.
It's just sewer. So it's taking water away.
So let me clarify that. Mr. Backen or Ms. Richardson, is there any restriction to us extending water to any area of the township we wish, similar to the restrictions on sewage?
No, Your Worship.
There is not. So we can put water wherever we want, but we're not allowed to put sewer service wherever we want. That is the situation that we're in. It'd be my hope that when we start to upgrade areas to modern infrastructure such that we protect our aquifers and deliver people quality drinking water such that they're not on wells if they don't want to be, and they have the option to connecting to sewer if they want to be. I'm on a septic system and on a well, and I would love to have and I don't have the option of connecting to sewer currently. I would love to have that option. I think there may be other residents that would also like that option, regardless of their lot size. And this is attempting to deliver that for them, along with my hope that we continue to look and hopefully talk about in the future here, extending water service to them as well. I met with a group of residents here just 10 days ago, desperate to get off of their groundwater and onto Metro Vancouver water with no possibility to ever be able to pay for it themselves. And there is a movement and a desire to have the option, and that is all that this is delivering for our residents, is for them to have the option to connect to water and sewer with water and sewer are not connected to this. We can deliver water if we so wish. If you wish to bring forward a notice of motion to extend water service along with any sewerage service, I suspect it would receive unanimous support from hopefully all of council, because this is what we need to do. Give people the option of modern infrastructure, which currently they do not have. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting, this is an interesting discussion, because as other folks were speaking, I look on this table and a number of councillors, myself included, and continue to be as well, are on a septic system. And the interesting thing about septic system is like anything else, is over time the standards change and the capacity changes as well as the ability for things to be replaced. And I remember that when the process to put High Point, which is way down in Zero Avenue up by 200th, they had, one of the requirement was to have both sewer and water delivered to site. And rather than, as being discussed today, about having a septic system. Also, many local improvements have come to this table for folks in the Brookswood area and other areas, of course, that have the capacity to get out of their septic systems and hook on to the municipal sewage system, the regional sewage system. So that's also something that folks are doing, because their septic fields over time start failing, and the new standards for today are as much or more to hook up to our system. I think that this particular item has been a long sought after request of Metro Vancouver going back, I don't know how long, but as long as certainly I can remember, perhaps the same time that we became members of the Greater Vancouver Regional Draining and Sewerage District. So I think you've got a big plate, Mr. Mayor, on your hands to move forward and to find an MOU from the region, but I guess this is a step forward. We're not going to get everything we want, but certainly sewage systems and operating them throughout the Salmon River and other areas is so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, Your Worship, you've answered most of my questions, and it's just in regards to water. I just have one point of clarification. Do we offer anywhere in Langley sewer services but not water services?
I think there's many areas, Mr. Bracken, that would qualify. Do you just want to
They always
confirm
go
that?
tandem, correct?
No, they don't. No,
Nope.
they don't.
Well, no, sorry. You can have water but not sewer, but do we ever have sewer and not water?
Yeah. They do not. If you look in the geosource, you see the map, and there's all kinds of areas with one and not the other.
Can
Either
I ask
one,
who
either
has
one.
sewer but doesn't have water?
Bracken, can you think of any examples?
It'd be an anomaly from the time that the sewage district was created, so there may have been properties that were on wells that retained the wells, and there may not have been water in the area, whereas the sewage district may have preempted or advanced beyond the water, our own water system.
Yeah, but it's not typical that we would put in sewer but not water.
If it's new construction, that's correct,
Okay.
but historical construction, it has happened.
Yeah, because I'm on water, but I don't have sewer. But yeah, okay.
Okay. Seeing no other discussion on the amendment, call the question on the amendment. This is into again. The amendment fails with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward. It fails, yeah. This is the amendment. Yeah, Councillor Pratt, Councillor Ferguson opposed. The amendment fails, so back to the main motion. Is there any other speakers on the main motion? Councillor Pratt.
Just a question for clarification. So a local area service, right? When the residents petition us to expand services to their area, in the Salmon River area right now, if they were to petition us, we could provide them water, but not sewer.
Mr. Bracken, in local area service could be for either service if Metro Vancouver was inside the sewerage area, if I understand it.
Correct.
So then now,
That makes sense?
so now if this gets approved, this all gets gone, then
This would be quite a lengthy process
Yeah.
to conclusion, but
once it gets concluded,
that's correct.
residents could petition for a local area service now for both.
That's correct. Mr. Bracken, Mr. Richardson, do you want to add to that? Would that be my
No,
understanding?
that is correct. Right now, they could petition for water, but because this is outside the district, they cannot do that for sewer. By including this in the sewage area, they could petition for both.
Go ahead. No, I didn't. You didn't vote wrong. Did you support the amendment?
Yeah.
was-
Oh, sorry, I voted the wrong.
Ms. Bauer, can you clarify the last vote? And if people want to revote, we can do
Yes.
that.
Yep, the vote was to strike with consideration that rural be defined to allow gross densities equivalent to half-acre lots with minimal flexibility for subdivision design as may be appropriate.
So that amendment was defeated. Do you wish to revote that?
Yeah.
You wish to support the amendment?
No,
You voted in favor of the amendment?
Yeah, I don't wanna
Okay,
oppose
so,
it.
so we're going to call the question again on the amendment. If there's some confusion, we were voting on the amendment to remove the definition for half-acre lots. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to call that question again. And the amendment fails with Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Martins, Councillor Van Popta, Councillor Pratt, and Councillor Ferguson opposed. Ms. Bauer, you've got the new tally, just to correct that, so.
Thank you.
Great, no problem at all. Is there any other speakers to the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the main motion. Main motion carries with Councillor Kunst and Councillor Richter opposed. Move on to P1, Langley Memorial Hospital Foundation Housing Agreement. Can I get a motion, please? I missed what, sorry? O1 is an item brought forward. It's just brought forward, right? So moving on to P1, so get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Van Popta, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on this? Yep, Councillor Richter.
Yeah, it seems to me that this whole project was pitched as affordable housing for seniors, and that was one of the reasons why it got the support that it got at the council table and got through the process as quickly as it did. I'm just wondering how come, like, can we not approve seniors' housing?
Mr. Bracken, maybe you can
Because
give,
in effect, we're reneging on it now.
maybe staff can give this some context of why this is required.
Certainly, Your Worship. To the question directly, in theory we can, but there's a practical impediment in this situation, and that is that the development requires CMHC financing, and CMHC is very clear that there shall not be any restrictions or discrimination based on age. So if the project is to qualify for any financing from CMHC, it must remove that restriction. Secondly, and this is perhaps not asked yet, but we might as well deal with it, there's a requirement from CMHC as well that the agreement, if you will, the housing agreement, not be open-ended. It must have a defined term. And that term can be 10, 15, or 20 years. Any of those years are acceptable to the applicant. The challenge is that for them to actually meet the requirements for having any township fees, DCCs waived, it must be 20 years. So if it's to be less than 20 years, we'd have to amend our policy. But otherwise, the safest would be to insert in the suggested resolution 20 years.
Okay, so what is the effect of this? The effect is that the foundation is going to get its money from CMHC, but where do the seniors go? Are they going to even be able to get into that building?
So, Your Worship, there would be a housing agreement in place for hypothetically 20 years, and the facility would be, under the terms of the housing agreement, affordable, and it would be open to all ages, including seniors, but not exclusively for seniors.
But who makes that decision?
It would be the board of the foundation or their designate, which could be the development arm. I'm not sure if they've created a separate entity for the
They
development.
have, in fact, created a separate entity. I'm not sure who control, I don't know if the control is different, but they do have a separate entity, and it would be, I think, for them to determine who they rent the units to at this point, yeah.
You know, it's affordable housing, so I'm going to support this, but I really think it's unfair to seniors. And this shouldn't have happened, and why didn't the foundation know what the restrictions are before they even came to us?
Yeah,
Thank
so my understanding when I spoke with the chair of the board is that they would wish to pursue CMHC financing, which has significant financial benefits to them in terms of the terms of that loan, and that they'll have an additional ability to term out the building at much better rates than other lenders. This would lead to more cash flow for Langley Memorial Hospital. Councillor Bailey.
So I think Mr. Backen answered. I look at this open-ended with no contemplated end date. Is that normal in circumstances like this, through the chair?
I would say it's not normal, but it's not abnormal historically. This is now being defined, and the intention was merely to have these these affordable housing units operate in perpetuity, but there's challenges in doing so in terms of maintenance, upkeep, and the market value of them, so that's why they're bringing a term to them.
No other discussion. I'll call the question on P1. That carries unanimously. We'll move on to P2, a notice of motion. I'll move this. Is there a seconder?
Your worship, we're assuming it was with the 20-year period inserted? We didn't formally say that. We can
Yeah,
infer
that would be my understanding as well.
Thank you.
Yep. Is there anybody else who disagrees with that understanding? Okay, so I'm going to move this motion, P2, Old Yale Road. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Martins. I'm going to speak to it briefly. I think the motion speaks for itself largely. I think, I would hope everyone recognizes the need to resolve the situation with Old Yale Road, which is quite long-standing, even though it will, of course, be competing with many other capital priorities. The timeline on this is very casual with respect to some of the other directions we've given to hold an open house in the third quarter of 2023 and then have it be considered by council in the 2024 budget process. Councillor Richter.
So I just want to make sure that one of the options would be to take a piece of the road and put it in a plaque.
Mr. Bracken, I believe
Plaque on the side of the
commemoration,
road?
yeah, I believe commemoration was one of the options, but we can have staff confirm that that's one of the options before it proceeds. Yep. Councillor Martins?
Yes, thank you. Only just to add a comment. I appreciate Mayor Woodward bringing this one forward. We heard this feedback from residents on Old Yale Road in that area and through the election, and I know it's a priority for those people, and they've waited a very long time.
20 years. Councillor Kunst?
Could we possibly also send this to Heritage Advisory? Because I know this has come up there as well. That maybe there could be a discussion at the Heritage Advisory Committee.
Yeah, Mr. Bracken, I think that's a good idea. Can you make, just by direction, put it on their agenda, just for their information that this has been considered and looks like supported by council and that it's proceeding, just so they're aware of it? Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Councillor Kunst? I think, is that good?
Yeah, I know that it has, there's some people who are really vehemently opposed to doing anything there. So it'd be great to have those discussions for sure.
I agree. It'd be great to have them provide that through the open house or through the committee.
Yeah.
No problem at all. Councillor Bailey?
I'm really glad to see this go forward. I drive that road daily, at least once. And the worst section of this road is right in front of a preschool. And when it comes to road safety, a road in that terrible condition is extremely hazardous to the children and the families, especially when they're picking up the kids at that preschool. So really glad this is going ahead.
Great. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I think it's important that we send it to the heritage folk. That's a good point that Councillor Kuntz has brought up. I still have hopes that I know staff are still asking that one segment of that could be only a few meters, but the Cement Association or some of the cement folks in the region would, they've been asked before, would come and put a little bit of cement down, and they'd sell a lot of concrete throughout the region. Surely to goodness they can give us a little bit. We've asked them before. Anyway, those are my feelings. Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on P2. That carries unanimously. So moving on to Q, motion to resolve into special close. Get a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Pratt. Yep, seconded by Councillor Martins. Does anybody have any items? Councillor Pratt.
I've got 3 quick items, one regarding legal, 1 personnel, and 1 land.
Going to have you say that again. Legal,
Personnel and land.
and you're guaranteeing that they'll all be quick.
Yes.
Okay,
Less than 20 minutes.
less than 20 minutes. Okay. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I had other business
Oh,
with
yes, I
regards to
will-
items distributed.
I will back up a little bit. I did
I'd
skip
like to
over
add a
that
personnel as well.
personnel. Okay, Councillor Richter, go ahead with your
Okay,
other
on
business.
December 22nd, item number 8, page 15, I would like to refer that to staff. And with a request, what would stop us from requiring all future buildings in TOL to be net zero? January 5th, item number 10 on page 16, concerning wait times at the Blair Pool. Could we get a status on that? And when a potential resolution might be achieved. January 12th, item number 3, I'd like to just make this for the public's awareness. The ALC is holding a hearing on Surrey lands, 305 acres, and it's lands that are being farmed right now on the Langley-Surrey border to put it permanently into the ALR. And if anyone is in agreement to do that and wants to let the LR know, it's at the KPU Auditorium Monday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. And I'd also like to ask if we should have a council resolution to support putting those lands into the ALR. For the reason that I specified earlier, they're in the recharge area of the Brookswood Aquifer. So if you would entertain a motion that council support.
Just trying to think, the hearing again is 23rd
It's the
of
23rd.
January, is that correct?
January, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we submit after that? Because I could make it as a notice of motion.
I don't believe so. I believe the public hearing will be closed. I'm hesitating, not because I think the motion will be fine. Hesitating because Mr. Backen, I've heard from City of Surrey that some of our First Nations have actually laid claim to it and don't want it to go into the LR. So I would hesitate, Councillor Richter, that if there has, because it is federal land, and it potentially would be reduction in value or some other economic process to put it into the agricultural land reserve, that this has been objected to. I haven't seen the correspondence, but that there has been correspondence from a First Nation, I think 3, including some of ours that are within the Township of Langley, that they may or may not object. I haven't seen this correspondence, so I would be concerned about endorsing its inclusion prior to getting an understanding of what they may be looking for. If you share that concern, or do you not?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's the federal government's decision as to how they're going to dispose of their lands. I could see that they would have a priority.
My understanding, Mr. Backen,
in the First Nations, but I don't see that stops us from passing a resolution that we're in favor of putting the lands into the ALR.
Mr. Backen, I just want to clarify. I think I'm still learning about some of these specifics, but the federal government, when it has land of this nature and it's determined that it's not strategic and was looking to dispose of it prior, that the First Nations have the right of first refusal in all effect. I think something to that effect, maybe not legally to that level, but something to that effect, and that's the process that they're looking for rather than its arbitrary inclusion into the ALR. Do you want to comment on that? And I certainly would hesitate for this council to sort of weigh into that process occurring in another municipality.
Correct, Your Worship. I guess technically the council can pass a resolution as it sees fit. It's really the qualitative nature of that resolution that I think is under discussion. And I too have heard that the First Nations are concerned about it being put into the agricultural land reserve because it may prejudice the value of that going forward. And the model works such as this, that if the land were to be provided to a First Nation as reserve lands, then the ALC would not apply. If it was, however, to be provided to the First Nations as part of a treaty settlement and it was non-reserve lands, but investment lands, for lack of a better term, then this designation would be quite harmful to them in terms of valuation. And the concept that the federal government not being bound by the ALR is correct. But if there's lands as part of a treaty settlement that are not deemed or made into reserve lands, then it does have jurisdiction on it and could mean that there's an impediment in terms of the First Nations objectives.
And so what I've also, but actually I haven't had a chance to confirm, I've heard that the City of Surrey, the First Nations have asked for an extension to the public hearing, which I haven't heard whether that's been granted. I think Mayor Locke was suggesting she was going to request that, more time for Surrey to weigh in, and then the lack of colloquial term, land claim or some sort of process was embarked upon by the First Nation. So I would be hesitant to see that it's urgent, but Mr. Councilor Richter, I'm not going to say you can't make that motion. I think I would, if you do make the motion, I would ask it be referred to get information on what the latest is going on before endorsing its inclusion into the LR.
Okay, well, I'd like to have us on record that we support protecting these lands, whether they go to the First Nations or whether they go into the ALR. So I'll put a motion forward that you can then refer.
Go ahead.
That council support the placement of the 305 acres in Surrey, the Surrey 305 acres of land into the ALR.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Kunst. Does anybody wish to discuss that motion? Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I am very, very cautious to this council about advising number one, First Nations, and number two, the federal government of what to do with their lands, especially when it's not in the township of Langley. These are very difficult times in the Indigenous portfolio. And for one community to take in a position, whether it might be deeded well-meaning, I would caution those communities. And that's the same of us making decisions about something that would happen in Abbotsford or south of the border in the United States, or even on the rainy side of the river, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, or the lake. I mean, we should be very careful what we say. As much as we support agricultural land, that's something in itself. This is federal land.
It's also in another
And
municipality.
I would advise council
So,
not
Councillor Richter, I think I would take your opinion as the Vice Chair of the Indigenous Relations Committee. Would you wish to make a referral motion for more information?
I would actually ask council not to entertain this motion whatsoever. just
Well, it's
to
been
let it go.
entertained, so I'll just ask if you wish to consider a referral for more information that could inform council.
I don't think there is any more information.
In regards to potential postponement of the public hearing and the specifics of any claim that maybe have been made?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay, does anybody else wish to make that referral? Councillor Richter will make that referral. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pratt, so I'm just going to call the question on the referral. That carries unanimously. Councillor Richter, do you have anything else?
Item number 7 concerning, again, this is January 12th, fence removal in Steele Park. I was wondering if council could get a status on this and whether or not the person who wrote the letter had been contacted. Number 9, page 63, Willoughby Library status, again, has a response, or will a response be issued to the person who wrote the letter? And item number 10 on page 64, the garbage problem, and it comes up again on today's items distributed as item number 11. So could council get a status report on that? Or an update on it, a memo, something?
Bracken, you have those? Okay. Anything else, Councillor Richter? You good?
No, that's fine,
Good.
thank you very
Anything,
much.
any other discussion? And go ahead, Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, I just, really, really quickly, I keep missing it. Mr. Mayor, I was wondering if you, the mayor, may want to put together a simple committee for the 150 TOL event. And I'm not looking for anything fancy or anything like that, but perhaps you could sit down with your staff and decide. I know it came up in the budget today,
Did, yeah.
so I just wanted to leave that with
Yeah,
you.
no, I appreciate that. I think it's something that's on my list to.
Thank you
to
very
get
much.
to before it's too late. And there are staff, not my staff. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
thank you. So with that, I'll call the question on resolving the special closed. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried. Move to a motion to terminate. So I get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Martins. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Termination. Meeting is terminated. Yeah, so we'll go into special closed at 10 to 4.